Well, hey, all you wiretappers. Good to be back here in studio, Gangland Wire. This is Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective and now turned podcaster. And I have another retired copper here on the show, Jimmy Dennedy. Dennedy. Jimmy, I tell you what, I had it down, Dennedy, like Kennedy. And our friend who's been on here several times, Michael Vecchione. Welcome, Michael. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you very much for having us, Gary.
Thank you.
All right. Michael has several books out there. He's prosecuted the mob. That's how I got onto him. He prosecuted he had something to do with the mob cops, Louis Eppolito, and I can't remember exactly now. I should have made a note on that, Michael. What was the name of that book?
The name of the book, Friends of the Family.
Friends of the Family. Is that those
Right.
two New York PD coppers that were in the pay
Yep.
of
Louis
of the
Eppolito,
mob?
and Louis Eppolito was one of the cops. And you know what, Gary? When you talk to Jimmy has a kind of an odd situation regarding Louis Eppolito, and it's a good story. I think he should tell your listeners.
All right, great.
You get to
We
it.
look forward to that, Jimmy. And Jimmy Dennedy, who was a New York City policeman, and he has a book, Tough Guys Cry.
Hard
Let me
guys
do that.
cry.
Let me do that over again. Yeah, all of a sudden I had it written down here. And Jimmy Dennedy is here with us. He is a retired New York City copper, and he has a book, Hard Guys Cry. So welcome, Jimmy.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, Michael, you and Jimmy, did you guys work together a little bit on the job? Did you know each other back then?
Yeah, we certainly did. We've probably known each other now for maybe 45 or more years. I got to know Jimmy because I got assigned a case involving, unfortunately, the murder of two New York City police officers who were assigned to Jimmy's precinct at the time in Bed-Stuy. And it was a case that had been tried twice before I got it. And it was hung. There were hung juries in both of the cases. And the DA at that point was going to just simply decide to not prosecute it anymore. And the head of the policemen's union, went to the DA, the district attorney, and said, listen, just give it one more shot. So I was at the time the head of a group called the Major Offense Bureau in the Brooklyn DA's office. And I'll never forget this. I was sitting at my desk, and the boss of the bureau that I was part of came into my office and said, come with me, we're going to see the DA. I didn't know. I thought maybe I was in trouble for some reason, but I sat down and he said, listen, I want to give you one more shot. I want to take this case to trial one more time, and you are the guy that we want to do it. So I was happy to do it. I tried a lot of cases by that point, and the best part of the whole situation, Gary, is I met Jimmy Dennedy. That was we became fast friends, and I got to tell you a little funny story. He had been involved in the two other trials. But when he sat down with me, the first thing he said to me was, or one of the first things was, do you eat lunch? I said, yeah, of course I eat lunch. Why? He said, the guy that tried the case before you and the one before him, they didn't eat lunch. And by the time the afternoon came, their energy was all had waned. And he said, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have lunch on your desk every time you come back for the lunch break from the trial. And he did. There was a sandwich waiting for me every day when I came back, and he is the guy that brought it to me. But before the trial, we went out, me, Jimmy, and detective from the Homicide Bureau who was assigned to the case, Tony Martin, went out to the scene. And again, another one of these scenes which I'll never forget. The scene was in the middle of Bed-Stuy on Troop Avenue. Jimmy, that was so
Willoughby and Troop.
Willoughby and Troop. So we're on the street, and the three of us are standing there right on the sidewalk, and we look around, and I said to Tony, did you hit every one of these buildings looking for witnesses? Because there was a problem with the case with the witnesses. One had died in a very strange way, and so he looked around. I don't know if you remember this, Jimmy, and he pointed to a building diagonally across from the spot where the two cops were shot. And he said, Mike, we never went into that building. And Jimmy and Tony went into the building, canvassed it, and came up with two new witnesses so it was a wonderful experience working with Jimmy. He was a hard worker. He really was tied to this case in the sense that these guys were his friends. They were two guys who were gunned down for really no reason by a member of the Black Liberation Army at the time, who was part of the Attica riots here in New York. He was actually one of the guys who started the Attica riots in New York, and he was out and he was with another guy, and we believe that they were going to meet another one of their fellow, I don't know what you want to call them, gang members, to set up a robbery, and that's why they were in Brooklyn. And the case had so many ups and downs and twists and turns, and it was something which I obviously will never forget. But the best part about it, I'll repeat myself, is that I met Jimmy Dennedy, and he and I have been friends from that point on until today. And so let me just get to the book, because Hard Guys Cry was to me was a labor of love. It really was. I got a call one afternoon, and I'm sitting out on my deck, and Jimmy calls me, and we just got to talking, and he asked me about doing a book about his life and his story. And I said, it's great. There are lots of books out there about cops and street cops and what they've done on the street. He said, oh, but he started to now expand on it. And then he told me the second part of his career, which was the prison ministry in the federal prison and the state prison here in New York. And I said, Jimmy, you buried the lead. That's the part of this book that I can sell to a publisher. Because, Gary, you probably know this. You probably interview these guys who do books when they retire. This was just going to be one of those. Jimmy's career on the street was terrific. The only problem was there are lots of guys who have books out there like that. So when he told me the story about his prison ministry, I was working at the time with a partner of mine, Jerry Schmetterer, who has now passed away. And we both talked about it, and we said, this is definitely a story. This is definitely a book. And it's been a long journey, Jim, till we got to this point. We've had COVID. We've had the guy in Minneapolis who was killed, and agents saying to us, nobody wants to publish a book about a good cop. Nobody wants to do that. You can't sell this. Until I didn't give up. I really didn't give up. And I took the proposal and I rewrote it after Jerry died. And then I sent it out to a couple of publishers, and one of them grabbed it and said, yes, I want to do this. And then, believe it or not, Gary, his publishing company hit the skids in terms of being able to spend money. He went out of business. So I had one more shot, and I gave it to the publisher of my novels. And she's finally is the one who said, yes, let's do this. And then here we are today. It's really, again, I said this before, but it was a journey of love. It really was, to tell this guy's story. And I know I'm repeating myself, but we became such good friends that our families got to know each other. I went to Jimmy's house for holidays. We really just became very good friends. And here we are. And I'm so happy that I was able to write this book, because I really believe that the people who read it will say, wow, this is a great guy. This is a great guy. And he is. So
interesting. Hey, Jimmy, I got a couple of questions for you. Now, you worked, that was the Rocco and Laurie case, if I remember right. And everybody who worked big city policing at the time, that scared the dog shit out of us. It was like these guys just laid in wait for a couple patrolmen to walk by, stepped out and shot them. That was my impression. And I worked that kind of a neighborhood, and we were pretty jumpy for quite a while, and it wasn't solved for a while. And we knew it was some kind of a political act, or at least that's what we were led to believe. Did you guys feel the same way in New York?
Let me just stop you for 1 second. The case that I did with Jimmy was Norman Cerullo and Christy Massones years later. The one that you're talking about, Rocco, Laurie, and Gregory Foster, was much earlier. Jimmy was involved in it because he was a good friend of Rocco Laurie. They went to the academy together. But so I'll let you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure that we were talking about the right thing. So
thanks for
Jimmy,
straightening me out. But that kind of a case, you actually went through two of them. So tell us about your feelings about that. How did that affect your dealings on the street?
I was in the academy with Rocco Laurie, right? And we had both come out of the Marine Corps at the same time. And we worked out together, we boxed together, and some of the guys were slacking off. The guy's name was Mr. Clean. He was the instructor. He would say, okay, now you're going to box with Dennedy or you're going to box with Laurie. Of course, they were slacking. We weren't slackers.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That was me. They said, Jenkins, go over there and box with one of those guys. No brother-in-law him.
So we became close. I knew his wife. He knew that time it was my girlfriend, but now it's my wife. We had gone out to dinner, and he was a really good man in the academy. I won the gun for physical fitness. He won the gun for overall excellence. And we got pictures with our guns together and stuff. So I was working at midnight with this guy, Vic Grillo, nice guy. And a job came over, and the cop shot in Manhattan. We were in Brooklyn. It's on the other side of the bridge. So we're saying, wait, and it became the 9th precinct. That's where Rocco worked. So we used to call him the Rock. I hope it's not the Rock. And it turns out it was him. These guys executed him. They were basically a domestic terrorist group. They were robbing banks. They were killing cops for no reason. They just walked past him, turned around, and opened up on him. And they shot him all over the face, the groin. And then they took their guns and shot them. And some of the guns actually wound up out in St. Louis or in West area. So did it affect me? Absolutely. I became, I don't want to say callous, but I was very leery of everybody. And I started, my niche was guns. I locked up a lot of guys for a lot of guns. But anything to do with any Black Liberation Army or anything, I used to accumulate information, intelligence information. And my locker was full of it. I'd lock up a guy. They used to have years ago the little address books.
Yeah.
I used to take their address books. And they would ask me information, the FBI, the major case squad, Jimmy, you have any information on this guy? In which I did many times, right? Fast forward, several years later, I'm out and I'm having a few cocktails. And then I drove back to the precinct, the 79th precinct, to meet a friend of mine, Bobby Perry. And while I was at the front of the desk, there's a place there you can check your messages if anybody calls in with messages. So I was checking my messages, and it came over, shots fired. Then it came over, cop shot. Then it came over, 2 cops shot. Then I drove down in my civilian car, right? It was dark, and it was like hell. You know, radio car doors open. You know what I mean? Blood all over the place. He also shot his friend, right? And he's laying there dead with a gun in his hand. There's blood all over the place. It was a nightmare. So let me figure this out. So now everybody and their mother's coming down because it's cop killings, 2 of them. It's a double header, so to speak. And then I see the blood going across the street, and the blood stops. So obviously somebody was shot. It's not our guys. And then I would assume he got into a car. So I'm trying to figure, is he going to go to the Spanish neighborhood or deeper into the Black neighborhood? And I said, let me go to the hospital. So I drive to the hospital and see if they need blood or anything. And out of the corner of my eye, when I passed Lexington Avenue, I see there had been a car accident. A guy hit parked cars. I kept going. And then I told Mike, you know, my father gave us a game when we were kids. It was called Game in the States. Had a map of the United States, and you had 2 little electric wires. And you plug one into the state, and there's a list of capitals on the other side. Yeah. And when you hit that, the light would go on. You got the right answer. And is God, is the Lord, a light went off in my head, just like it was the right state capital. Yeah. Went to the hospital, and they're dead. You know, and then this guy, Paulie Saracena, was crying. He was in plain clothes, anti-crime. I said, Paulie, listen to me. 2 things. Once, I want to come in the car. I'm going to go back to the scene. Because when I got there, there was a Spanish guy on the pool room across the street. And he was a little Fugazi type guy himself, but he used to give me information. Yeah. He used to give me information on his competitors.
Yeah. Yes.
So when he saw me, you know, he ran, right? I wanted to go back and talk to him. But on the way back, I said, Paul, I'm going to stop at this accident scene. It's just there. Yeah. Go back there. Ambulance is starting to pull away. Fire truck was there pulling away. So I went over there, and they said, it's an accident scene. The guy's injured. I said, what kind of injury is it? The guy said, well, he dressed his wound because he refused medical aid, this guy. So I said, I just dressed his wound. I said, well, undress the wound. Let me look at it. I'm not undressing the wound. I went over and I just ripped it off. And it's a gunshot wound. Right?
Yeah.
So Paulie had a radio, calls the sergeant down, and they bring a witness from Willoughby Avenue. She comes down. She says, "That's the guy who killed the two cops."
Mm.
So we get him, put him in the ambulance, right? In the ambulance, he's a big boy, this guy, right? And he goes to reach and he grabs my gun from my holster.
Oh,
So now it's like an arm wrestle for the gun between me, him, and Paulie Saracena. And during this arm wrestle, necessary force was used.
yeah.
And the necessary force was used until he dropped the gun. We got the gun from him. Goes to the hospital. He has a Derringer behind his belt buckle, and he has a police handcuff key. These guys are the real deal.
Yeah,
They-
that's
they-
a real deal.
They train for this stuff. They associate with others that train. They shoot. You know what I mean? So it's just uncanny that Rocco was my friend, and he was murdered in a double police homicide. And then a few years later, I lock up a guy from the same team that killed two of my friends. You know, it was a nightmare. And then we went to trial, and that's how I met Mike. And it's it's pressing on your brain.
Yeah.
Something like this happens. And I don't have to tell you, Gary, but then you get other cases. So you're making more gun arrests, but you still have this, you know, it's tough. It's tough. But it was
Gary, I just want to interrupt for 1 second. Jimmy mentioned her. They brought a witness back to the scene to identify the bad guy, and she was a great witness. She was there when the shooting occurred. She was actually moving into the building that the shooting happened in front of. And so the case was, we had she was the best eyewitness to the case. And as Jimmy and Tony Martin, the detective, who were assigned together after the actual arrest, because they had to get the case together and look for more witnesses, etc. They went one day to see this particular young woman, to talk to her and see if everything was still good, if she was okay. Turns out she was in the hospital. Nobody knew this. She had gone into the hospital, we were told, because she had a cold. She died in the hospital, Gary, from a cold, which is what we thought.
Man.
Turns out she had encephalitis.
Yeah.
But the thing was, at the time, we said, who goes into a hospital, number one, with a cold, and who dies from a cold? So we, at that point, not me, but I wasn't on the case yet, but others. And then when Jimmy told me this later on, I said to myself, it's got to be some connection to the bad guys. Maybe they poisoned her. Maybe they did something. And we looked into it. It turned out, Jimmy, what was the disease that she had?
I think she had herpes viral encephalitis in the brain.
Yeah, yeah.
And
that's
it's a possibility that it can be induced.
Yeah, so that's what we looked at. And the medical examiner at the time of the death never really looked. The DA who had the case at the time thought, this is a slam dunk. We had this witness, that witness. Jimmy arrests the guy and he's got the bullet, which another thing happened. He wouldn't allow the medical people to take the bullet out of his leg. It was the cop's bullet.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't let him do it. So we had to go with an X-ray of the bullet at the trial instead of the bullet itself. But it's a case with, as I said before, excuse me, many twists and turns.
Really.
And the whole story is in the book.
And I don't want to take away from Jimmy's story here, but I have a legal question. You couldn't get a search warrant to take the bullet out of a person. Is that?
We tried, and you know what the judge said? No.
Okay.
So
I never ran into that. I've heard of it before, where the bullet stays inside and you can't get it.
They tried. A judge wouldn't give us the search, the ability to search, quote unquote, which meant taking the bullet out of his leg. Anyway, so that's where we met, and it was quite a case.
And Jimmy, I understand you go through your career and you see all these horrible things, and you're hardening yourself. And the title of your book, "Hard Girls Cry, Hard Boys, Hard Men Cry." I don't know why hard guys cry. I don't know why I can't remember. I should remember from Norman Mailer's "Tough Guys Don't Dance," but hard guys cry. And so you harden yourself all those years, but then something happened in your life apparently that changed that. I know after I retired, partly what happened to me is I became a lawyer and I started dealing with people from not particularly criminals, but many times relatives of people who had gone to jail. And I worked for public defenders and really got to know people on the other side and realized that it's, we're just two sides of the same coin many times, trying to get along and trying to get by. So what happened in your life that changed that, your attitude?
When I retired, there was an old man who was a farmer, and he was like an Appalachia type situation. His farmhouse was falling apart. The second floor was owned by raccoons. He had electricity in one room and no running water, but he was the calmest, nicest, most spiritual guy you ever want to meet. Almost no teeth. He had one tooth. And his name was Louis Adamski. We used to call him Louis the Farmer. So I used to take care of Louis. He was taking him over to my house for Thanksgiving, Christmas, drive down his long driveway, see how he's doing. And then I didn't see him for a while. So I drove down the driveway one particular day, and I said, Louis, I haven't seen you. You haven't called. He said he had bladder cancer. I said, really? I said, wow. He said, he had 2 surgeries. I said, you're going for follow-up treatment? And he said, I'm supposed to go every 90 days, but he had no insurance, zero, no social services, nothing. And the doctors were suing him, and they wanted his farm. He owned 1/10 of this farm, had about 80 acres, but it was heirs. Everybody in his family had passed away. I said, Louis, you got to get follow-up treatment. So there was a city that's not about a half hour away called Newburgh, New York. And there was a urologist I was familiar with. So I told him the story. This guy has nothing. He said to me, if you will drive him, I will treat him like the president of the United States. So for 2.5 years, just about every month, sometimes twice a week, it all depends when his visits were, I would drive Louis. So it's like an all-day affair almost, because I have my own business, so I don't show up for work. You know, what do I care? So I take care of Louis all this time. And my friends are patting me on the back saying, oh, you're Louis' angel. So one particular day we go in, and after Louis' checkup, he calls me into his consultation room, and he says, so your friend's cancer is back. So you got to be kidding me. He said, yeah, I feel it on his prostate. He said he has to go for a biopsy Friday. This was on a Wednesday. So I don't know how he's going to get there. It's an all-day affair. I said, Doc, listen, I'm married to this guy for 2.5 years. I said, I'll take him. He said, you sure? It was an all-day. I said, Doc, I don't care. He said, all right. He said, I'll tell you what, as long as you're going to take him, your PSA is just borderline high. He said, I feel there's nothing on your prostate, but if you're going to take him, let me give you a biopsy too. I said, fine, I don't care. So we both get the biopsy. The next Wednesday, he calls both of us in. I have cancer as well, worse than his, right? So he got radiation. I went down to New York City. There was a top flight surgeon in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And I told him the story like I'm telling you now. So he said, you got to cut that out of there. You don't want it in there. And so they cut me in half. They took it out. And in the recovery room, he comes in and he says to me, you weren't Louis' angel. Louis was your angel. He said, you had a C-grade cancer. It was starting to spread, but I got everything. So he said, you would have been dead about 1.5 years. He said, because you had no signs, no symptoms. By the time you had the symptoms, it would be all over the place.
Yeah.
So it changes the way you think. That I was invited to go on to a religious retreat weekend, a Cursillo weekend. I didn't want to go. I'm not a holy roller. It's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
But I was socially boxed in by friends. So then your wife has to go too. So my wife, Noreen, said, oh, I'll go. I said, oh, now I got to go. So I go on this week. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You can't bring a watch. You didn't have cell phones then, right? So you're stuck there. So I went, and I hooked up with a couple of other ex-Marines. And this actor, Michael Vecchione, he was in The Sopranos. So we're sitting in the back, like we're just going to ride this one out. We figured we'd ride it out. It turns out that it was very moving. It was very moving. And people spoke that I thought they were like punks. I knew them indirectly. They had quite a story to tell. And then weekend was over, and on the way back, it was November. And I was telling Mike, I rolled the windows down. It was like spring. It was spring in my mind. So you see things differently, like these computer generated like pictures. You see what it is, but if you stare at it long enough, another picture comes out from within the picture, and kind of life came out of life for me. I saw things differently. Then these guys asked me to go into the prison. Listen, I say, listen, you're a carpenter, you're a plumber. You don't know what these guys are. I've thrown these guys down steps and shot a guy at my house. Crazy. And
Yeah.
again, I'm socially boxed in. So we go up to the prison. There was 41 of us, 41 of us, them. It's called the Kairos. It's an interdenominational prison ministry. So I sit in a big circle, piece of paper, it passes around. When you get it, you have to say who you are, where you're from. So I get it. I said, my name is Jimmy Dennedy. I live in Orange County, New York. I'm married. I have 2 children. And I retired from the New York City Police Department. They booed me. I told Mike it was like an old dog growling.
Yeah.
I said, what am I doing here? So the next day, because you had to sleep up in the prison too, right? The next day,
Wow.
you're at a table. So you have an inmate on either side. So it's like maybe 9 people at the table, and there's 3 of us and 6 of them. And don't ask them what they did. Never referred to them as a prisoner, as a resident. They were like guys I grew up with in a neighborhood. I said, what are you doing, you stupid? So it was a religious weekend, but also it's practical life. And the guys were good. You know what I mean? I got along well with them. So we did every day. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they finished. And that's it. I'm done. I am done with this. I said I would do it. And I'm saying, I wonder if any of my guys would show up to a Wednesday night. They have a Wednesday night follow-up to this organization. I wonder if any of my guys would be there. So you know what? Let me go to one Wednesday, right? All my guys are there. All my guys are there.
And that was the only, Gary, that was the only table where all of them showed up again.
Mhm.
So that's why he knew that this was the right thing for him. I'm sorry, Jim.
So,
I just
yeah,
wanted
no.
and so this was still in the prison. You
Yeah.
went back up the prison,
Yes.
and they invited these guys. If you want, you can come to this follow up. And
Right.
your guys,
At that time, every Wednesday at 6:00, they could go into the chapel to this particular group meeting. So I just want to see if any of my guys were going to show up. They all showed up. And then the volunteers drop off. And then I said, let me do another Wednesday and another Wednesday. And it comes like everybody wants to talk to you. It's like when you go into the pet store, little puppies, they want you to pick them, like pick me.
Yeah.
And you wind up with a group. I tell Mike they're my guys. And then you wind up, it's a spiritual thing, no question about it, right? There's prayer involved and everything, but you go through life with these guys. And a lot of them have a lot of crazy situations.
Yeah.
I had one guy, there's a mafia guy, and then Big Frankie, and he wanted to say, Jimmy, this new guy, he wants to talk to you, John. It's all right. So he takes me behind this little interdenominational altar they got there, right? So I said, how you doing, John? He says, remember me? I said, no. He said, you should. You broke my nose. So I said, when did I break your nose? He said, yeah, in the park on 53rd Street, where we used to play hockey. He said, you broke
Yeah.
I remember you. And I mentioned his name, his last name. I said, you were messing with the park attendant. I slammed a basketball in his face. You know what I mean? He never forgot it. They told Frankie, yeah, he was crazy before he went to the Marine Corps. But they'd make guys in there where I worked.
Yeah.
The drug cases that they had. You know, I knew who their bosses were. I testified in Philadelphia against one of these guys' big bosses. And it's just, it was like almost an inside straight. It was like meant to be. It was meant to be. And then my parish priest, then I started, I was interdenominational night. The Catholic guys had nothing. I started a Catholic night with a few other good guys, my friend Brian and a few other guys, right, on Thursday. So now I'm going there Wednesday and Thursday. So my parish priest said the state maximum security doesn't have anything like this. So let's start one there. So I'm going Wednesday, the federal prison, Thursday to the state max, you know, and I did it for 25 years, 2 days a week.
Wow.
And if the guys in Brooklyn, where I was a cop, knew I was doing this, they say, wrong guy, definitely. Somebody else, you got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
But it's the way the good Lord leads you.
Yeah. Something changed in your life, and it's not like you had any control of it. It changed. You opened yourself up. It seems to me like it, and you just didn't have any choice but to go down this path.
And you know what it is also, Gary, right? It's also like you're preventing crime. You're doing the same thing, only from the inside. From the inside, you want to change the way they think, the way they act. And there's a million things I could tell you how I was able to change things in the prison. They were going to stab somebody. The guy was a rat.
Yeah.
And then they didn't like him. I didn't like him. And I told him, listen, I like the guy. He said, you like the guy? Don't get involved in this. I said, do what you want to do. I like the guy. They never touched the guy. Because if they do something like that, then they're going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Gary, you
So,
should, I think Jimmy should tell you, he's talking about the effect he had on these guys. What really was the point of the prison ministry was to essentially make these guys, I think, better people and to change their lives. I think you should ask Jimmy, tell him the story of the Boston mobster, because this story it really hits home as to exactly what effect he had on someone who was one of the guys that you might have on your show someday. This guy was a really bad guy, and he was up
yeah.
there with Whitey Bulger, etc., in Boston. So I think it's worthwhile to tell the story, and it really hits home in terms of how effective Jimmy was after being effective on the street, locking up these guys, what he did with the prison. So if you have a bit of time, I think it's worthwhile to hear the story.
Yeah, let's hear it. I always want to hear stories about mobsters anyhow.
Yep. Go ahead, Jim.
We were up at the federal prison, and it was during the holiday season, right? And the volunteer chaplain was Father Bob Papora, and he was giving a talk on forgiveness. So we had all these wise guys, it was mixed. They had all different guys. This particular time, a couple of wise guys, they had their arms folded, and they said, Father, he said, you want me to forgive the guy that ratted me out? He's home with his family, and I'm here doing X amount of years left on my bid. So I raised my hand. So I said, listen, if this guy is lying, he put you in prison for no reason, shame on him, he should rot in hell. But if he just exposed what you did anyway, you know you did it. If you did it, the good Lord see you. You live in a fishbowl. If the guy just exposed you for what you did, you have no bitch here, pal. Jimmy, this guy Jimmy, is a different name in the book. Jimmy stands up and he says, listen, he said, I've been in jail, I've killed people. I forgive anybody. I want forgiveness. I'll forgive anybody. So that was it. Eventually, Jimmy, a couple of years later, goes home. So he called me at my office a couple of years later, and he wanted me to write a letter of reference for him to work at the docks for Homeland Security. So I said, I don't know, I'm going to write it. No, put down that I was a prisoner and just what you thought of me. No problem. So I met him in the prison, stuff like that, right? About a year after that or so, I get a call from him again. He says, hey, Jimmy, you got time? Hey, Jimmy. I said, good. I got all the time in the world for you. He said, what's up, pal? He said, I was on a train platform. He says, and I see this guy. Him and his associate tried to kill me. They had stabbed me 13 times. He said, I already took care of his friend. And I walked up to him, like a face-to-face with him. Then he recognized me. The guy turned white and urinated all over himself because he knows he's dead. And Jimmy says to me, I put my finger in his face and I told him, you know that thing you're worried about? Right? Get out of here. I forgive you. Now get the fuck out of here now. And he says to me, Jimmy, it would have been easier for me to clip this guy than to forgive the guy. But I forgave him. And I'm saying, Jimmy, I'm so proud of you. For him to call me to tell me how he responded to that situation, which was completely out of character to the old guy, the old Jimmy. Yeah. He was very proud of himself, and I was very proud of him. So that's the story Mike is talking.
It was the story, quite frankly, Gary. I'm sorry.
Didn't he have one of the Westies in there with him? They were a particularly brutal crew in New York City.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, we had a few of them up there. We had Jimmy Coonan, who started the Westies.
Oh, okay.
Jimmy was there, and I was friendly with Jimmy because I knew guys that he knew. The guys at Otisville Prison is a high medium. Lewisburg is a max. So when guys behave in the max, they could come down to the medium. So Coonan came down. He never came to the services and stuff. We were talking the whole way on the side. But another fellow was a Westie, and tough guy. You know what I mean? They would drive through jewelry stores 50 miles an hour, go inside and rob everything. But they would go in there before with their girlfriends, looking good, dressed nice. They knew where the stuff was, and they would take everything. And he wound up getting locked up for almost like a Lufthansa type thing at the airport, only they got caught. So he was at my first weekend in the prison, right? And we became very close friends. And I tried to help him, and he responded very positively. And you sit in a circle, there's a cross. Whoever has the cross has the microphone. Nobody interrupts you.
Yeah.
When you're done, you pass it, the next guy talks. So he was talking, and we finished. Kids with the Spanish kid. So the Spanish kid is talking, and he's talking. So I told him, you can't talk. What are you talking for, Rich? You can't be talking like that. The kid's talking. So he didn't come for a few months. Then he comes back, right? And we're sitting there talking. And then he has the cross and he puts his head down. And he starts talking and he says, something happened to me. I can't explain it. He had a Spanish kid in the next cell, right? It was a new guy. They robbed the sneakers and the kid had no sneakers.
Yeah.
Right now he's got his head down. And I'm thinking maybe he robbed the kid's sneakers, right? He says, I gave him my sneakers because I had an extra pair. And as he's telling the story, his head is down, the floor is gray, but getting darker, the teardrops.
Yeah.
He's telling the story, he's crying. And then he says, maybe I'm not all bad after all. I said, how can you think of yourself like that? He eventually goes home. So my wife, Norley, and I get invited to his wedding, which is a no-no, but the guy was home. And the wedding is on Mulberry Street in Little Italy. The vice guy section.
Yeah.
So we go down at the wedding and we're like the oddball there, but he could introduce us to enough people, and if you see change in people, it's wonderful. If on the street, if you go to these religious retreats, people go jumping out like a gazelle. But in prison, if an elephant jumps an inch, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you see somebody that thinks that they're ugly, they're not ugly inside. So I found it very rewarding. And I didn't think they'd respond to retired law enforcement, but they responded well.
Yeah.
Because I spoke their language.
Yeah.
So it lasted 25 years, Gary.
Yeah, I've got a couple of guys here in Kansas City that it's not a spiritual kind of a thing, but I've become friends with them. And one guy told me, finally, he said, I can talk to you and you understand what I'm talking about. He said, all the rest of the people in my life anymore, because he's out of the life, he said, they don't understand what I'm talking about. He said, I don't have to get back into life, but I can talk to you. And you know the people I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. I said, yeah.
Exactly.
I do.
Exactly. So obviously, in case it was pretty obvious that when we started to hear all these stories, when he told Jerry and I the story of the mobster who was crying because he given the sneaker, that's where the title of the book comes from, Hard Guys Cry. But there's one other guy in there that you should ask him about, and that is, we had this I don't even know what to call him. He was really an oddball guy, a criminal in New York. He was a rich guy who owned a lot of, he ran art galleries and collected art galleries and collected paintings and got into the art world and was advising rich people as to what art they were buying. And it turns out he was basically a sadist. And he had another guy with him who he and the other guy wound up, he didn't get charged with this, his partner did, wound up killing somebody. And when they found the body buried, laying in the woods in upstate New York, he had one of those sadomasochistic masks on him, his black mask. And this individual was one of Jimmy's guys, and he was the hardcore. Am I right, Jimmy, in terms of not wanting help at all? He was just the kind of guy who, if you helped him, it was going to be a miracle. And he did. He helped him, and it's a miracle. And it's worthwhile to tell the story about this guy. His name was Andrew Crispo. He's no longer alive. And he was all over the newspapers here in New York City because of the whole the sadomasochist activity that he was involved in. And that the picture of the dead body with that black mask on was all over the newspapers. And this guy, we have his picture in the book. If you see him, it's butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. It was like, it looked like the nicest guy in the world. Businessman. Turns out he was really one of the worst guys in terms of how he treated people. And Jimmy finally got to him. It was, to me, one of the more miraculous transformations when I heard all of the stories was this one, because of what he was on the outside and what he became after Jimmy had him and he got out. He did not repeat his life the way that he was beforehand. Crispo was a tough guy, right, Jimmy, in terms of getting to him?
Andrew, Sky Andre brought him down to one of our groups. And he asked if he could bring his friend down the street. Everybody's welcome, of course. And like, you've been around tough guys your whole life. Everybody's a tough guy. You're a tough guy. Everybody's a tough guy, right? This guy had no muscle tone. He was like ashen in color. He looked like a raccoon. He had like rings around his eyes, and he was like creepy. So he came, and then he came for about 7 years, all the time. You get to know him, right? And he got grabbed for that sadomasochistic murder, but they couldn't prove it. He got locked up for attempted kidnapping the 3-year-old daughter of the federal trustee. That's why he was in jail now, federal jail. But he, if you make a long story short, he doesn't know who his parents are, right? And I'm not a bleeding heart. I'm just telling you the way it is. He was dropped off at an orphanage as an infant. And I was there for sentencing. And this is what the judge said, Mr. Crispo. He said, before I sentence you, I'd like you to know that I researched your history. As a newborn, you were dropped off in an orphanage, right? You remained there for 18 years, where you were repeatedly beaten up and raped. But after living there, you managed to raise yourself up to get on the top of the art world, even owning a world-renowned art gallery in New York City. He said, for that, he said, I give you credit. However, then he banged him for 7 years on the other thing. But he came down and he had nothing spiritually. And if you sit with him and you talk with him, he kind of listened. He came around. And like I told Mike, there was another guy, Colombian guy. His wife used to bring his daughter up all the time. So he came into the group a little late and he was crying. And then I said, what's the matter? He said, I'm not going to see my daughter for 2 weeks. I said, Father Conlon told me once, there's a price for loving. The price for loving is the absence of love. You have to experience love to miss it. To Andrew, who was sitting in our group, Andrew, could you tell him a little bit about yourself? Oh, yeah. He said, see the visiting room that you were in with your wife and your child? I've never been in there, and I'll never be in there. And they said, there's nothing worse than being alone and no one cares. And he came, and the rings went from his eyes, and then he became involved in all this other stuff. And he actually became a kind guy. He got involved with the church and things like that. And then he eventually went home. Tell you the money he needed money for an appeal. He sold one painting for $2.46 million.
Oh, wow.
For the attorney's fee. That's just one painting. He had money, but he had nothing.
Yeah.
He had nothing. And then when he went home, he used to correspond, and he'd write beautiful things. Thanks for the prayers. Thanks for your wife. How's your dog? It's not the same guy, but he wasn't like one of these tattooed tough guys. He was like creepy tough. And at the end, when he left, in my opinion, he was not. So if you can help somebody, it's nice to help somebody if you can.
Yeah,
that's
interesting. That's a true shift in personality, and it gives somebody some spiritual hope in their life that they can, from what you're describing to what he was to what he left when he left. That's amazing. That's
Exactly.
an amazing story. Hard
There it
Guys
is.
Cry, this journey of a tough cop from the mean streets to a prison ministry. Jimmy Dennedy and Michael Vecchione. Jimmy and Michael, I appreciate you guys so much for coming on and telling these stories. And guys, there's a lot more stories just like this and better in the book. I'll have links to get it down in the show notes. And guys, you got anything words you want to say? Anything you left out?
Gary, listen, keep getting those pension checks.
Yes, I will.
I told my wife, Nora, put my feet in potting soil. If my toenail grows, that's a sign of life. Keep getting that check.
Really?
Thanks
so much,
want to thank
Jimmy.
you.
All right.
I just want to thank
Michael.
you. You've been terrific, and I hope that I really mean this when I say this. People who get this book and read it, or listen to it, or however they want to get it into their mind, they're going to love it, because this guy's story is just fantastic. And we touched on a few things, but we didn't get into the real meat that's there. And it was again, a pleasure to do this.
Oh yeah.
I
got one guy I talked to that has prison stories. I tell you what, guys, there are so many great stories that come out of the penitentiary. It's amazing. I think partly people don't have much else current to talk about, so they tell stories from their past, and you get some great stories coming out of the prisons. Thanks a lot, guys.
Gary.
Thank you.
All right.
God bless, my friend.